we go. Well, welcome everyone to the Election Essentials webinar. We had a little bit of break, but we're excited to go into phase two of our webinars. We appreciate all the great feedback we got and the folks that are watching them and commenting and that sort of thing. So really excited, and Jonathan and Christian here. And so we're going to continue on and hopefully continue to help you as an advocate add electoral work to all the things that you're doing to be effective in whatever issue, whatever battleground you're fighting on behalf of folks here in this country. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christian to give his welcome as well and talk about where we're going to go in this second phase.
So this second phase, we decided that we wanted to get a little bit more in the weeds with things, and some people found it helpful.
I think I lost you, Christian. You there, Christian?
Oh, how about now?
Okay, yep, we're good. Yep.
All right.
Oh, now I don't have you.
Effective when it comes to voter contact. How elected officials work with and against third-party organizations, how to operate in a nonpartisan way in a very partisan world, and also how to build coalitions, how to recruit candidates, and then what do you do when the election's over? That's 90% of the work that we do in our role is work when there's not an election, and that work in that time, November 4th, is just as important as any other day. So we're really excited to get really in the weeds and be as helpful as possible in the next coming weeks.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to all of those, but I think, when the election ends, well, that's the last one in this series. I agree. People forget and they just think the election's over and they're done, but there's a lot of really important stuff you can do to make sure all that work you put in pays off. And I'm also excited about the voter contact. So, and a lot of good stuff in the middle. All right. So Christian, just a little bit about your background, and I think a lot of folks know that already, but if you want to.
Yeah. So Senior National Director at Our Turn Action Network, we focus on getting first-gen college students into the political sphere here. But before this, I've run a number of federal races, statewide races, and I'm really excited that more and more people from the campaign world and electoral politics have been starting to come into our sector, because it really needs a well-rounded, holistic approach to get some of these big systematic changes we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I'm the Senior Vice President at 50CAN, and I've been doing elections and advocacy for 18 years. And I also on a local elected office, so I have experience as a candidate. And I've written a guide to political advocacy that a lot of our topics are coming from that. You can find that on our 50CAN website if you want to purchase a hard copy or download a PDF of it. And so getting to this week and what we're going to talk about, I did not update this slide, so I apologize, folks, but we're not talking about our lawyer. We're talking about political fundraising. First thing, we're going to go over what's interesting topic, but we're going to dig into political fundraising and really talk about how it's similar, how it's the same, and then go through some suggestions for how to work through all those things. And then we'll take question and answer if there are any. If you have questions, there's a little button at the bottom of your Zoom webinar that says Q&A, and you're welcome to click that and just throw questions out there. And if there are any, we'll take them at the end. So digging right into what's interesting, this is just a generic video screenshot I have of Vice President Biden, who everyone knows is the Democratic nominee for president this year. And I picked it as my what's interesting because over the last month, and actually both campaigns, I don't know what lists I'm on exactly or how they choose me for different things, but or who they're targeting, but that's part of why this is interesting for me is I've been getting Joe Biden pre-roll ads on YouTube all the time. Every time I click on a video, I've got Joe Biden encouraging me to give money, to sign up for their cause. And I feel like in my mind, pre-roll ads online are like the new television ad. So I've used it in campaigns pretty effectively. it's interesting to track how long, or if people watch it to the end. That helps to know what, if they're interested, the effectiveness of your ad, that sort of thing. And no personal offense to Joe, but I haven't always watched to the end of that one, but it's also been showing up for me all the time. But I think that's really interesting, one, because a lot of candidates are using pre-roll ads. Two, how do they target? It's not a coincidence they're targeting me. I don't exactly know why they're targeting me in Nebraska, for example. But there's a lot that goes into that. So when you see a pre-roll ad, it's not like an ad that's just broadcast on television and you just happen to be watching the nightly news that night. There's a lot of science into who they're targeting and why they're targeting. So that was mine. So Christian, you said you had some thoughts on that.
Oh, one, I am dying to find out how you got on both lists. That's something that I love to see what your partisan score is, and all those scores that made you appear on both lists. But that aside, I think you're right. I think these are the new TV ads. The problem is that most streaming services, especially the ones you pay for, allow you the option to skip it after a few seconds, whether it's 3, 6, 15, 30,
Yep.
just depending on how much they pay. And so I think there's like a good side and bad side to like this digital world that we live in, because to your point, you never finished watching this ad. And what I'm noticing as a nerd, I actually do watch a lot of these ads. I go on their YouTube channels and look at all their ads, and there's so much amazing content out there. I really am curious on how they decide, what they're gonna like double down and triple on, and what they're not. And I'm sure they do a lot of A/B testing, but there's just so much content out there. Just for Joe Biden example, he has some amazing video out there, and some of it is 90 seconds, 2 minutes long, that just won't make the cut. Most people won't see. So this new world that we're in, where I can't go to your door and have a 5-minute conversation. How do I get that 5-minute conversation down to 30 seconds is going to be a new art form that I think COVID is really going to push us to go on. And I'm really fascinated to see how it works out, because I think just, I'm sure Trump and Biden both have name ID that it's in the 90 percentile. So it's not a race for name ID. It's more of a race for persuasion. And I don't know how digital ads do that just yet.
Yeah. Something I had fully grasped when you talked about that. Man, the first 5 seconds of these pre-roll ads have to be critical. How you hook a person in those first 5 seconds. You don't have 30 seconds, you have 5. So that's sort of a fascinating angle on those ads.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And to your point, we're going to see, we're just going to all be bombarded with digital ads from now until, if and when there's a vaccine for this. And so what does that mean for lower races? Your state-led races, your municipal races. How do you break through that noise? To your point, the first 5 seconds are going to be critical. And it might be as something as riding the coattails of the party that's going to win in your state or your area, or it might be more dynamic to actually break through and change the conversation.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to learning, just like the rest of you. Christian and I are constantly learning different techniques and strategies and trends. So we'll be learning right alongside you with all this. So, all right. So for this week, we're going to talk about how to do political fundraising, the secret sauce, the magic, to make sure you've got the resources you need to be successful. Well, I got some good news for you. Political fundraising is exactly the same. No worries, similar approaches. Don't be intimidated. It's just like any other kind of nonprofit advocacy fundraising that you're already doing. But wait, it's exactly different too. So this is my joke. There are huge differences. There are nuances that make it unique. So I'm just being a little bit lighthearted here, but it really is something you shouldn't be intimidated by. There are a lot of consistent principles in fundraising that are the same with political fundraising. So I don't think people should be intimidated. I think they should be, if they've done fundraising before, they shouldn't feel like they can't do political fundraising. But we are going to pick out those differences, so you do know where things diverge and where you need to approach it a little differently. So first thing, we're going to talk about how it is the same. So how there are similarities between traditional fundraising and political fundraising. And so how it's the same? How is it exactly the same? Well, the first way is just identifying donors. How you approach a donor, it's not a lot different than a traditional fundraising situation. Just like a traditional fundraising situation, it's important to build relationships and understand that you need to approach prospective donors before you're asking money to get to know them, help them understand you better, and get a bit of an opening to approach them with a more specific ask, just like you might with traditional ask. You want to identify people who share an interest in your cause. Not a big difference. So find people that give to, maybe non-politically at this point, but they give to your cause in other means and through other organizations. Maybe they give to informational campaigns related to your cause, or maybe they support a lobbying effort related to your cause. So it's the same way with any kind of giving. Find folks that already have an interest. Also, you want to find people who have a history of charitable giving. So this is a little more detail. You want to know how much are they giving, where. You can find that information up sometimes publicly. You can ask around. There's information out there for that. You want to approach in a professional manner. You want to set up a call. You want to schedule it. You want to dress professionally. You want to prepare a plan. You want to make sure you're welcome to provide an ask to them. So the things that you do for a traditional donor, follow up, thank you notes, all those kind of things are the same. And then lastly, just as a reminder, as you do identify donors, we just want to make sure you understand it's legally impermissible to use federal election reports for political solicitations. So if you go to a congressperson's campaign finance reports, you are legally not allowed to take those names and addresses and then solicit them for yourself. I'm not saying people don't do it, but we want you to know, and there's the link there. You can look it up to understand that rule. I'm not particularly sure how it applies to state campaign finance reports. Certainly people do look at those reports to get an understanding of donor interest, but just so you know, there are laws against using those reports in a very coordinated way. But Christian, I know you talked a little bit with me beforehand about approaching donors and understanding their kind of their history, and just had some comments about that, about how to approach donors and understanding how they like to be approached.
Yeah, that is, have to work is figuring out what is their self-interest involved in this, and how they like being communicated. And I'll get a little bit more detailed an example on the differences. I do think that's where the differences lie between C3 and C4 work. But when it comes to something like identifying the shared interest, that is usually your lead. Here's why we are in this together, and here's how we're going to make a difference is the number one way to really identify donors. And it's also, a perfect example that kind of ties back to your last row about FTC rules. You're right. It's legal for me to see who's donated to X congressional member, but I can't use that information. And what I've seen a lot of people do in the past is they'll find. So I worked for a congressional member who was a doctor, and he was a member of a Latino doctor association, and we would have interns just call every single doctor and say, "Hey, it's important to have medical experts in Congress representing you. Cut a check right now." And I think it's things like that I think a lot of people in our sector kind of like forget that we can reach out and not just tap into the same well repeatedly. It's to think creatively and outside the box to really identify new donors that have never been asked to donate and that would be ready and willing to if someone made the case for them.
Sorry, my phone rang. Thanks, Christian. Yeah, absolutely. So again, approaching donors is very similar to kind of traditionally, and those are good feedback from Christian there. So that's weird. Sorry. Okay. So next, how it's exactly the same. Have a plan. Like anytime you're asking for money, you want to have a plan. You want to explain to a donor what their money is going to be used for, And again, political fundraising is no different. And I'm just going to lay out here the logical progression that I go through when I create a political fundraising plan. So the first is, what specific change are you seeking? Again, like any plan, what is it you're trying to accomplish? That it's very important for the donor to give. You're not just doing it for the sake of it, you're doing it for the sake of something really important. So what is that change you're trying to seek? And try to be as specific as possible when you do these things. What has to happen for that to occur? Obviously, that change isn't happening magically on its own. So what needs to happen right now in the legislative body or whoever controls that change? What has to have change in order for that to happen? Like there's a local issue that I'm dealing with on my city purposes. We have 5 members on our council. It's 2 to 3 right now. I'm in the 2, and the other 3 on the other side. So very specifically, what has to change is one of those 3 have to change their mind. So that's an example for what has to change in order for you to achieve what you're trying to change. And then how will a successful election help? So let's say you go and involve yourself in an election. How will that cause that? So in other words, in my case, this really isn't a good example for my specific case, but theoretically one of those 3 could lose their election and someone that supports it could be elected, and now it's 3 to 2. So again, be specific. How is that election going to cause that change to occur? And then what's your strategy in order to have a successful election? Well, we need to win 2 seats. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to target 4. We only need to win 2 of them. We're going to do direct mail. We're going to do radio ads. We're going to get the people out to do door knocking. What's that strategy to have that election? And then lastly, of course, how much will it cost? So that's the logical progression I go through when I put together a plan for a donor. So what I do when I create a plan for myself, but donors want to know that their money is going towards something that's well thought out and organized. And those are the steps that I recommend. Christian, you had maybe 1 or 2 other things that you like to incorporate when you present a plan.
Yeah, and this might not be the same for everyone, but one of the challenges that our organization faced early on is that we were somewhat new to the C4 world. We're also a smaller scaled organization and getting into very deep waters. And so what we had to do in this plan that you just laid out is we had to provide the unique value add that we're adding. Because we have to make the case for ourselves, quite frankly. And I think a lot of organizations are going to face that. If this is your first time around, or maybe it's the first time you're asking for a larger, significant piece of the pie that's going into it, you really do have to make the case on why you are uniquely positioned to do something that's either different or to a different degree of excellence to your counterparts that are asking for either to participate in the same race you are, or maybe reallocating the money to something that they think is necessary versus the campaign you want to run in. So I think that's really important to really make the case for yourself, your organization, and what makes you different. And I think the other thing, seeking the change, this is, again, we'll get into how it's different, but everyone is different in the sense of what is the change they're looking for and the way you have to message it to them, right? Some people are looking for immediate change. Some are looking for long-term change. Some are looking for systematic change. Some want just red meat. And I think, going back when we're talking about identifying a donor, the first and foremost thing you have to understand is, like, what is their self-motivation? Because that goes into your plan. That is the lead headline as you're approaching them. So I think this plan here that you've laid out, if everyone could just take this format here and recreate it, one, I think program officers would be a lot happier, and 2, you would be doing yourself and your organization a great service, because you will have clearly and simply executed on what you're trying to get across. Also, as a talking point, right? It's one thing to have it on paper, but the more you do exercises like this, the easier it is for you to do an elevator pitch when you have a 2-minute opportunity or a 5-minute opportunity. It's tools like these that we need to continue to hone, even if no one ever sees it, because it just makes you that much more sophisticated at your job.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I agree. I love that. How putting this effort into the longer plan helps you be more effective in that concise plan. Because a lot of times people are like, I got 5 minutes. What do you want to know? Or what do you know? What can you tell me? So yeah, being prepared to run through these things very quickly. You're not going to be able to do that in an organized way if you haven't thought out all the details. So that's a great point. I love that.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than getting hit with a question and being flat-footed, right? Like there's nothing worse than it took you weeks, months to get this meeting. They hit you with a very honest, legitimate question, that maybe you should have the stats ready or the plan ready for it. And even, if it's something that's unknown, even if they ask you an ambiguous question that there is no right or wrong answer to, just being able to be prepared for that, it really puts you at a different level of respect. And I think that's really, one of the cornerstones of this when we're talking about donors. Donors really have to respect you, respect your thought process, respect your end results, because that's what they're really investing in you and your vision, whoever's laying this plan out in front of them. And the way you do that is by being a thought leader in their eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. So really two big buckets for how it's the same. Identifying donors and working with donors, very similar to a traditional donor. And then coming to them with a plan, well thought out plan. Not much different, but doesn't mean we shouldn't emphasize it and reinforce it, that you still need to do it for a political pitch. So now that we've talked about how everything's different or the same, we're going to talk about how everything's different, right? So put all that same bit out of your mind and let's talk about why when you walk into a political donor pitch, there are things that are 100% different that you need to be prepared for. So we're going to go through those now. And the first thing has to do with the lack of tax benefits. So this might seem kind of boring, but it's really important because you need to understand what's the thought process in the mind of a donor. So there's generally three types of advocacy organizations: 501c3s, 501c4s, and 527s. So really quickly, I'll remind folks what those are. So 501c3s are organizations that, for the most part, educate people about important issues. Explains, and I'll give examples in a second. 501c4s are called social welfare organizations, and they advocate for specific things to change in our laws. And then 527s are any kind of political organization that tries to make change at the ballot box, tries to elect or defeat candidates. And there's a little blurring the lines between those three, but that's generally what they are. So when I talk about the differences, what I like to, a bit of a made up example, but let's say you live in a community and, some of the parents notice that there's some bad sidewalks for their kids. They want their kids to walk to school, but there's cracks in the sidewalk. Kids are catching those, they're falling, it's dangerous, and they want those sidewalks fixed, right? Like any parent would. So they form a group, and it's called Parents for Safe Sidewalks. And they want to let people know that there are unsafe sidewalks in their neighborhood. So they form this organization, they communicate, they talk to people, they share ideas about it. That's great. Mom for Safe Sidewalks, that's a 501c3. Well, no change is happening. They've educated you about what the problem is, and no one's solving it. So they realize they need to take the next step and talk to the people who can solve the problem. So in my case, I'm on city council. They would come talk to me, and they would say, you need to spend more money. You need to require people to fix their sidewalks. You need to make this change happen. And because they're doing that, they're lobbying. And so they would be Moms for Safe Sidewalks Action Fund. So that just made up name, but that's what they'd be doing as a 501c4. Well, they came to me. They've educated people. They have lobbied elected officials, but still no change is happening. They're frustrated. So they got to go elect new elected officials. I'm not doing my job in their mind. So they form Moms for Safe Sidewalks or Parents for Safe Sidewalks PAC, Political Action Committee, because they want to go elect a new city council member who's going to fix those sidewalks. And that's what a 527 is. So that's a little refresher that we did from an earlier session, but wanted to make sure people understood the difference. So 501c3s, they don't require donors to be disclosed, which we'll talk about in a little bit later, but they allow a charitable deduction. So if you give to Parents for Safe Sidewalks, you can write it off in your taxes because the IRS wants to encourage you to give to things that they consider charitable. So depending on their tax bracket, there's different amounts of savings, but I'll just make it up. Let's say if you gave $100 to Moms for Safe Sidewalks, you might be able to deduct that, and the actual cost to you might only be $75. So that's a big deal for a lot of donors. 501c4s, there's no federal disclosure. Sometimes the states require those donors to be disclosed, but the IRS has decided that you shouldn't be able to deduct that on your taxes. So $100 to Parents for Safe Sidewalks Action is $100. It costs, the donation's $100, and it costs you $100 to make the donation. And then finally, political donations, you do have to, the federal government does require disclosure, and usually states require disclosure as well. So the donor's public, again, we'll talk about that next. But there's no charitable deduction either. So again, when you're approaching a donor that's used to giving to 501c3s, it's going to be, and they have likely done that calculation in their head about how it's going to, how a $100 donation actually only costs them $75. So if you're approaching someone like that who's never done political giving before, you might have to adjust your ask, or just be transparent with them so they understand and don't make a calculation that isn't correct. So that's pretty straightforward. But moving on here to the next slide, this is where I talked about disclosure issues. So many donors are really used to being anonymous or having a low profile, and they're just accustomed to that. They're comfortable with it, and knowing that their political donation is going to be public. They don't like to be the story. A lot of donors, we'll get to the controversial issue next, but just in general, some donors don't like to be part of that story. And if they're a large giver to your political effort, they're more than likely going to be cited in public media reports. So you should be prepared to share that with your donor and know that they might have that sensitivity coming in, and try to reassure them. But some donors are just going to have a level of discomfort with that. Related to this a little bit is, along those lines, they're also used to earmarking their gifts. A lot of times they said, I want to give toward this part of your work. I want to give towards this person that's working for you, this project they're doing. Political gifts are not, there are some exceptions, but really for the most part, donors aren't allowed to earmark their political gifts. So they can know why they're giving in general, but they can't say, I want you to spend this money on this candidate. I want you to spend this money on this candidate. And some donors just, again, those are things they're accustomed to on the 501c3 side that are different on the political side, and just something they might not have a comfort level with. But, getting beyond just disclosure requirements and being anonymous or not, there is a risk of controversy. So it's somewhat related to this disclosure, a risk of controversy that they're not used to. Most charitable causes, not all, but most charitable causes, 501c3 causes, reflect well on donors. To an art museum or to an animal shelter, things that people like to talk about, to the American Red Cross. There's all kinds of things, and donors, it's not necessarily bad for them to be proud of it and to share their generosity. So it's not necessarily bad for them to be like to focus on the publicity side of it. But they're used to that. They're used to like 100% of people saying thank you for what you're doing. That's not really a case in politics. In most political, you look at our country and how it's a one person versus another for things like president or U.S. Senate. There's usually an A or a B choice. A lot of these elections come down to just 51% versus 49%. So half of the people in the country might really hate what they're giving to. And that can be difficult for them. They like to give to things that have lots of accolades, not things that are controversial. So you have to really, warm them up for it. You have to help them understand why it's so important to give, even though it's contentious, even though not everyone's going to love it. You got to really get them to believe in the cause so they can get over that. Because, for a lot of these donors, especially the ones that are, whether they're more affluent or not, I had a person that was a previous city council member, hardly, very high income person, but they were a realtor. And they told me that they know they lost business over being on city council. and they're not, they're not super wealthy. They can't always afford that. And it not only affects the elected officials, but it affects the donors. We've seen in the news recently, restaurant owners that had donated to President Trump's campaign being boycotted. There's, plenty of examples out there. I don't think we need to go through them all, of people being, businesses being boycotted because of the political views of the business owner. So again, you have to make sure your donor's sensitivity to that, and be prepared to encourage them about the importance of the cause, so they can get through this. And then lastly, on the risk of controversy, they don't control what you do with the money. So they're putting their name on your product, basically. And if you go out and do stuff that is not just controversial, but like you might do things that are illegal, heaven forbid, watch our webinar about talking with your lawyer, but you might do things, make a misstep, and cause legal controversy, or you might say something in an ad. And if they aren't fully trusting where you are with that, we'll get to that later, that can make it very difficult for them to want to give you money because it's risky. So Christian, I've kind of gone on a little bit about this, but I know that you had some thoughts kind of on this topic with dealing with donors and the disclosure and the controversy side. What are some of your thoughts and building off this?
This is usually one of the largest hurdles that I've encountered when it comes to people who don't typically give and trying to expand that pool of donors is this thing. They are, I don't want my name in the press. I don't want this. I saw my friend go through X because they gave to a candidate. And there's not really much you can do about it, because no one might know my name, but, if someone's really gunning for, I'm a donor to Jonathan and Jonathan gets a donation from me, they'll try to find, how much I gave. And even if it's $1, and then let's just say he's running in a very environmentally friendly arena, let's say he's running for Santa Monica City Council, and I so happen to work for an oil company, the number one headline is going to be donor, oil donor gives to Jonathan. Even if it's only $1, it doesn't really matter. And so that does two things. It hurts the campaign, but it also makes me reluctant to ever give again. And so this is where stewardship comes into play, where it's like, you have to be honest, you have to be transparent about what happens with their money, and that they don't really get to earmark it like they're used to. But also, there's a risk in that you're going to be responsible with it. This is the benefits of having C3s, C4s. But when you get into 527s, when a lot of these things get disclosed, you have to be able to be a steward and navigate those conversations. And again, this is one of the largest hurdles that we'll always encounter when it comes to these things.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. Great stewardship. Great comment. So I think really just reiterating what Christian and I both talked about this, it's a lot of transparency. You're way better off letting the donors know on the front end what they're facing and preparing them for that, and reiterating the importance of your cause than you are trying to low play that and then them getting upset later on because you walk them into a buzzsaw. So that's really important. So now the last item for how this is different, these givers have options. So, I mean, they always have options, that's true, but they have a specific kind of option. You're trying to impact elections through your work. We're educating advocates who largely have third-party organizations that are promoting a cause. And as an advocacy organization, you're interacting with elected officials. Well, those elected officials run their own kind of campaigns. So they can give, the donors you're talking to can give to candidates directly. And we'll talk a little bit more in the steps you need to take about how to talk to donors through that. But they've got lots of options out there. Why would I give to you? I can give to the candidate myself, and so forth. There's also other political committees that maybe do similar things as you, or maybe political committees that represent a certain political party that have a lot of issues that the candidate or that the donor might support. So there are a lot of options out there for these givers, and you have to navigate that and be aware that there is competition. So Christian, any wrap-up thoughts on how this is different before we get to working people through suggestions for how to approach it?
I go back to my original point. What is your unique value add, right? They have options, be prepared to make the case, when it comes to candidates. Most cities now, for the most part, have put a cap on donations directly to candidates. When it comes to other political committees, again, what makes you unique? Always finding that avenue that set yourself apart and justifying the investment in you and your organization and your tactics is just pivotal to every single conversation you have.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. So we've talked about how it's the same. We've talked about how it's different. But now we're going to give you some approaches. So some of those arguments or conversations that might sway a donor or help you secure that gift that you're looking for. So first of all, we are going to focus on the benefits of collective giving. This is something that's really important to emphasize with donors, especially the ones who see, hey, why don't I just give to the candidate? Really, the first thing you want to explain to them why, and when I say collective giving, that could be giving money into one organization that spends it politically. It could be what is sometimes called bundling, where all your donors write a check to one candidate, for example, and then you deliver those checks together to a candidate. But the point is, it involves donors working together toward a common goal, cause, plan politically. So the first thing that you want to stress with donors is that collective giving makes a bigger impact. Sometimes it takes a lot of money to execute these plans, and sort of a smattering of gifts here and there isn't going to do it. Bringing it together collectively to fund a larger plan is necessary in order to achieve the goal. So that's the first thing to talk about, is you can make a bigger impact if you give your money together. There's efficiencies, so forth. Secondly, you can more easily coordinate. So the money is all going the same direction. And as much as people like to say they're on the same page, if they're not giving together, so people can kind of all go their same direction, or sometimes the donor message isn't always consistent. So candidates are hearing different things from different donors. It's not clearly focused on the same message. So again, that's really important. And if they give together, it's much easier to funnel that message into one thing. And then lastly, it demonstrates the strength of a coalition. Again, if donors are giving kind of in a smattering, a disorganized manner, you're not always sure who's giving where and when. If they give together, either through the bundling format or through a political committee like we talked about, people can see the volume of the giving that your coalition has. So they can see it all together. It's very clear to them. They don't have to do the math. They don't have to put all the pieces together. They can just see right there how many people are behind the cause that you're advocating for. So Christian, I don't know, have you ever struggled with persuading donors to give collectively as opposed to individually?
That's a great question. I think donors have an appetite to give collectively, to be quite frank, because either there's someone in that coalition that they blindly or just based on previous relationships really do trust, and that really gives you the validation you need to raise into this pot of money. The biggest hurdle is on the execution side, right? Like building that coalition, having a collective plan, dividing up work, that builds trust. And we'll talk about that in future episodes about building a coalition. But donors, and the other thing about donors is the old adage, no one likes to be the first one on the dance floor. And when you're able to bundle and package into one big collective pot, it makes donors more excited to give, and it also shows them that they're not the only ones in this fight. That their peers, people that they respect and admire, are also giving, and it gives them the validation they need to continue to contribute to this effort.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, and so we're going to dig into more later. But absolutely, and I guess I've had the opposite view. I feel like I've had a harder time. So it's interesting. We've had different perspectives about that. I've had a harder time convincing people why collective giving is important. A lot of people give to candidates. And I think part of it is the donors have a lot of causes they care about, so they feel like if they give collectively, that prioritizes one over others. When they give to a candidate, they obviously can talk to the candidate about all kinds of things. But it's also good to let a donor know too. You can do both. You can still give to the candidate directly, but and still have that kind of broader message about issues you care about, while also giving to something individually. So
No,
that
it's interesting because I think this kind of is a microcosm for the sector as a large, but there's a lot of donors who like to give directly to the candidate because they want to go to that fundraiser. They want to have the dinner with the candidate and be able to talk to them whenever they like. But there's a hard cap on it. And there's other donors who understand that there's a hard cap there. They feel they want to be able to have a bigger support system for the candidate or issue or bond, or and so they get involved in 527s. And I think it's just two different mindsets. One is about having an impact, and one is about almost being in the trenches with them. And so again, this goes back to identifying your donor and what interests they have, and how to pitch them. But I think that's also true of the people who are involved in it. There's people who only work with candidates, and there's people who only work on 527s. And I think it speaks to a lot of that mindset of what has the impact on the race and the long-term objective and goals you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, good points. I think we'll get into those a little more. And you mentioned limitations, so we'll go on the next slide. Another way to focus on why you are the best option, to help persuade a donor why they should give to you and not to a candidate or whatever. Campaign finance limitations. So Christian mentioned that. And limitations just mean most states limit how much an individual can give to a single candidate. It varies widely, but that's there are a lot of reasons for that, which we can talk about, going all the way back to the beginning of campaign finance reform in the 1970s, or the beginning of the modern era, I guess, of campaign finance reform. But basically courts say states can limit how much you can give to a candidate, but you can't limit how much an individual can spend to communicate on issues, which means groups that do third-party communications they can spend whatever they want, but candidates have a restriction. And so there's a lot of legal leaves for why there's a difference there that I'm not going to get into, because as we talked about before, I'm not a lawyer. But the point is, if limitations are low, there's a donor can't give very much to a campaign sometimes, and maybe they want to have a bigger impact on that election. So that's why you're a great option. Hey, you want to make your $5 to $100 donation? That's fantastic. Donate to the candidate. But this race is really important, and there's more we can do, and you can give to me and not have limits on that. And so just an example for why this matters, Florida is a state, big state, huge state Senate districts. The state Senate districts are like the size of congressional districts, it feels like. And I would say just on average, you got a couple 100,000 people voting in a general election in these state Senate districts. Massive elections. People raise a lot of money for. What's the limit? Florida, and actually this has gone up recently. It used to be much less than this, but Florida limits donors to give $1,000 to a candidate. So just ballparking here for you. If they want to do one mail piece, and let's say they just mail just enough people to win the election, so they mail 105,000 people, we're still talking, even at that volume, I don't know, Christian, you can check my math. It's been a long time since I've done a 50,000 or 100,000 person universe for a mailing, but we're talking like $50,000 to $60,000, and so that means they need 60 individual donors to give them their max donation just to do that one mail piece. And do you do just one mail piece in a political race? No, you need to talk to voters multiple times. So let's say you've got to talk to them 5 times. Well, that's 5 mail pieces. You have to have, 5 times 60, that's 300 donors that you need to max out just to do your mail plan in the state of Florida in this race. And we're forgetting television. We got to pay for staff. I mean, they have to have hundreds and hundreds of individual donors to do that. Well, what does that do when they pass these laws that create these limits? it pushes money to third-party groups. And again, that's where you can say, hey, this is where we fill in and we can help candidates because we don't have the same limitations that they do. So long-winded, but that's, and then last thing for why it might be the best option, sometimes you're just better at it. Candidates aren't always professionals at running political campaigns. And so you can stress the donors that you have the experience, the understanding to do better with that money on behalf of that candidate than the candidate themselves. So I don't know, Christian, how you approach this, but to me, that's a pretty clear argument for why a third-party group, and I'll say it might be unfortunate too. I know people don't necessarily love third-party groups having that influence, but in the way campaign finance rules are set, it kind of creates an inevitability in my mind.
I wish I had something to add other than I just agree with you. I totally agree with you. We should probably have like a session about public finance campaigns, the benefits and cons of it, but you're absolutely right. And I think this is knowing the limitations that people can give. It's these, they seem like minor details, like things like reporting deadlines and contribution limits. These are the things that, again, are going to set you apart and be prepared to pitch to donors.
Absolutely. Well, we have one last slide on how to approach these things, how to approach political fundraising. And that is about building trust. So it, again, links back to the issues we mentioned before that donors are going to see political giving is risky. Giving to you might be risky because they're lending their name essentially to your cause and what you're doing. So there are a few things that we recommend to help build trust. And Christian referenced this before. Start with one. I always like to focus on one significant donor who wants to be particularly involved in what you're doing, and get their commitment first. Put that time in early on to find that one donor, because not only does it, as Christian mentioned, hey, this person's giving, you're part of something, but also that donor can help you and talk to other donors and say, hey, I'm doing this too. I'm putting my money into this. Why don't you join me? And that is much more effective. Donors like to be with other donors. So that's really important to start with one. The other is demonstrate a plan that has clear deliverables. We talked about a plan earlier about that's something, but focus really on the fact that you win and lose. Tell them you are accountable to them. This isn't an issue or a concept that's hard to decide if you were successful or not. Very clearly, they're going to know at the end because you're either going to win or you're going to lose. And donors like that transparency, that accountability that you're offering them. You're being vulnerable to them, and that, to me, usually plays well. Surround yourself with experienced professionals. Make sure they know you have people around you that are going to make sure this campaign's implemented the right way. Don't hesitate to talk about the biography of the people that are part of your team. Let them know that you're well set up for that. Show a track record they can trust. This is sometimes, it's a little bit like the professionals. So if you're a group that hasn't done political work before, talk about all the successful things you've done in other venues. Let them know that you're a person that gets results. And then once you've been involved in political cycles a couple times, go back to those previous cycles and let them know how, this is something you've done before, you've been successful, show them that track record. And then lastly, keep them informed. I think, again, this is one of those things where it's the same as any kind of fundraising. Call them up when you don't need money. Let them know what's going on. Keep them in the loop. Donors like to know that you're not hiding things from them, that you're being transparent, that they're involved in the process. All those things will help you build trust. I don't know, Christian, is there anything different that you would say on trust or any specific experiences you had?
Yeah, I'm going to almost go backwards here. So I'll start with the keeping them informed. I think this is something that I'm really envious of people who are good at it, and it reminds me. And so keep them informed. It's so easy when you're responsible for so much, from raising money, managing staff, doing the day-to-day, setting vision, making a strategic plan, to go to a donor on their timetable, asking them for money, getting the money, spending it, and then not communicating to them until it's time to ask for money yet again. I think it's the natural pattern that people just go through because they're like, well, there's a formal process to request money and to communicate with this person. And what I've seen, the people who really excel at fundraising, they're the ones communicating, have broken down that almost that fourth wall and have like a ongoing conversation with their donors. And that's just by keeping them informed. These donors gave money because they cared. And they care so much that they gave money, and they're kind of nerds about it to a certain extent. So you sharing your information with them, the updates, one, sets you off as a thought leader. Two, show that you respect their partnership. And three, it doesn't make it awkward when you have to ask for more money or ask money for a different thing, or even when you're preparing to lose. You built that relationship to communicate with them. So keeping them informed as something as simple as a 15-minute check-in once, however long period, or a quick email, text, whatever. I can't stress that enough. This is where I love political fundraising versus, C3 fundraising. It's a campaign junkie in me. I love being able to sell the red meat. I love selling the sizzle. I love selling that. And it's also so much more informal for the most part. In the C3 world, even in the C4 world, there's a lot of bureaucracy sometimes with different organizations, with different donors, that you have to set up a coffee and you have to have X amount of meetings before you can put a proposal in front of them. Political fundraising is almost the opposite. Everyone knows when election day is. There's so many, mile marks that you can just say, there's a filing deadline, there's this deadline, that deadline. I need you to give now. And also it breaks down the formality with these people who are so used to being formal and having, a lot of red tape and gatekeepers around. Starting with one, if you can get one donor on your side and have them go and be your validator and advocate to other donors, it changes the power dynamic almost when it comes to from our sector to the donor world, and can build longevity as you win and as you prove your case to people. So there's building trust in the C4 world is on a compressed timeline, and I think it's usually good for a lot of organizations because you'd get new donors in the door. It would usually take years to get them to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. Absolutely. Well, that wraps our presentation, but I want to do some question and answer here at the end. And there we go. Christian, I have one question for you for our question and answer period as we wrap up here. What about hiring professional fundraisers for this kind of work? What's your take? And Christian is not prepped for this, so I'll ramble a little bit so he can think about it. What's your take on using professional fundraisers for this kind of third-party advocacy fundraising, political fundraising?
I like it, right? So, if it's just like a contracted job, there's this election cycle coming through, you need to raise money for it. You bring on someone who has a deep Rolodex and a deep amount of network in that city, state, or sector. I'm for it. And the reason I'm for it is because I would trust myself to be able to carry on those relationships forward. That if I can get them on the hook, I can lure them in. Now, there's downsides, right? There's sometimes where the fundraiser is almost like a wall between you and the donor, and there's no direct interaction with them. And sometimes the donor might not even know who they're giving to. They're just giving to Jonathan. I know Jonathan, he's the fundraiser guy that I give money to. And then he comes back and tells me if we won or lost, almost kind of like a stockbroker. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the hurdles you have to overcome. But if you can really put your brand and name and build a relationship with them, and there would be no other means to get to these people, that they're not typical donors who give the C3 organizations, who give the C4 organization. I would invest in that if I had the resources.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not, I have a slightly different view. I'm not completely against it. And it's interesting you mentioned there are some donors that sort of follow around specific fundraisers, kind of like a club that they're part of. And so, that is important if you can get those fundraisers to be part of you. In a lot of ways, you're recruiting the fundraiser as much as the donors in those cases. One thing I would just caution people for hiring political fundraisers is most political fundraisers work for candidates. That's where they really get their bread, do their bread and butter. And I don't know, I just have found in my experience that I don't know if it's the fundraiser themselves isn't fully transparent with the client, or they're not fully transparent with themselves. But I think they feel like third-party political fundraising is easier or just like raising money for a candidate. And I think this is where you need to be very cautious about it, because it is not as easy. So they might have that huge Rolodex of donors, but when they're working for Jonathan or Christian as a candidate, we have like 100 different issues that we're weighing in on, that we care about. And so they can easily match a donor with a cause. So it's pretty easy. Like, oh, you care about healthcare? Great. This is Jonathan's position on healthcare. You care about education? Great. Here's what Jonathan cares. But when you're just working on one issue, it's much harder to find a donor that aligns with your issue and is willing to give politically. And I find a lot of political fundraisers are either naive about it, or they're not transparent with you about that difficulty. And so I would urge you just to be cautious of that. Cautious that it's going to be a panacea for you from a fundraising perspective. And so I would also caution you to don't sink too much money up front until you start to get a sense of the results. So that's sort of my counterpoint to that, Christian.
I absolutely agree on all fronts.
Yeah. Well, it's just good to think about, and we just appreciate everyone being part of this. I hope, for those who are able to watch live, and for those who are able to watch on the recorded video, never hesitate to contact us with questions, with different topics. We hope that this will be interesting to you over the next several months. We'll be back. We're in this sort of summer and moving into phase 2. We're going to be doing these bi-weekly instead of every week. So in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about how to do effective voter contact. And I'm super curious to hear the conversation between Christian and I that we've done this for so many years. I think it'll be very interesting to find out what Christian likes, what I like, and what professionals suggest. So Christian, anything to offer about that before we sign off?
No, I'm also excited for it. So thanks for everyone joining on, and happy to keep the conversation going.
All right. Thanks a lot.